Ari Lewis Show.
You're listening to the Ari Lewis Show. The original date of this episode is November 5th. I'm your host, Ari Lewis. You can email me at any time, arilewishow@hotmail.com. 20 years ago, the Prime Minister of Israel was assassinated. What has happened since, and what would have happened had the Prime Minister lived? To discuss this is Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen from the Alternative Action Movement. He is a peace activist. Rabbi, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
Yes, indeed. The number one question I've been hearing all week is what would happen had Yitzhak Rabin lived. Obviously, he wanted the Oslo Accords to go through. Had he lived, would we have peace with the Palestinians today?
That's your question for me?
Yes, indeed.
So, of course not.
So tell us why.
We wouldn't have peace with the Palestinians because the Oslo Accords, the whole paradigm was mistaken. It didn't recognize the core grievances or aspirations of the Palestinians, just as it didn't really recognize the core grievances or aspirations of the Jews. The Oslo Accords was basically a top-down approach to force the partition of the country that really didn't take into consideration what was driving the conflict, and certainly didn't take the actors actually driving the conflict on the ground into consideration, unless you count Yasser Arafat.
All right, so in that case, why was this idea popular to some? Obviously, a huge percentage of the population did not like this idea, but there were those who certainly liked it. Why did they like the idea?
Well, no, first of all, I think it was popularized. It's always been the position of the international community regarding this country, at least since 1947, to partition the country in two. And it's certainly been consistent policy in the United States and in European governments since 1967 to force Israel to relinquish the territories we won in that war. The Oslo Accords was really just a continuation of that, but it created a situation, like if you look at the reality today on the ground as a result of Oslo, the situation for Jews and Palestinians is much worse. For Palestinians, you have checkpoints, walls, restrictions on freedom of movement, much harsher military bureaucracy that people are forced to live under than existed 25 years ago. For Jews, we've experienced politically motivated house demolitions, the destruction of entire communities, the negation of our national rights, and not to mention the thousands of people killed on both sides since the signing of Oslo. Oslo was never really a recipe for peace, but it was always in the interest of certain people. I'm not just saying people abroad, but even certain political and business leaders in Israeli society and Palestinian society to keep Oslo alive and to keep Oslo going. Largely because of the economic agreements built in, but not only.
Okay, elaborate more on that. The economic parts, tell us a bit about that.
Meaning there are individuals, parts of the ruling class of Israeli society and parts of the ruling class of Palestinian society benefited economically from the Oslo Accord. Certain people were given exclusive rights to export Israeli goods into Palestinian Authority-controlled areas. Certain Palestinians were given exclusive rights to import those goods because of the occupation, because there are Palestinians who are basically not able to move around freely. Their movement is controlled by Israel, by like a military bureaucracy, by the IDF essentially. They're a captive market. And this has benefited certain people.
All right, so then one of the questions that also remains is what is Yitzhak Rabin's legacy? Prime Minister 2 different times and very high up in the military, obviously. What is his legacy at this point, considering the Oslo Accords didn't go through? We're in the situation that we're in. How would you describe his legacy?
Well, I think that the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin was a crime against the Jewish people. But the greater crime against Rabin himself was the corruption of his legacy. Because since the assassination for the last 20 years, Yitzhak Rabin has been used as a martyr for a cause he did not really support. And according to many people who were very close to him at the time of his murder, he was beginning to oppose. Only a couple of years ago, his daughter, Dalia Rabin, gave an interview to Yediot Ahronot where she spoke about how her father was about to cancel the Oslo Accords Defense Minister Bugi Alon, who at the time was the head of military intelligence, spoke about the same thing he wrote in his book about how Rabin was beginning to suspect that he had made a mistake, that he was leading Israel down a very dangerous path, that he cannot trust Yasser Arafat, and was planning to pull out of the Oslo process. And there are indications even, there are those who believe he entered into the Oslo process reluctantly only because he discovered it had been transpiring behind his back too late. But, even if you go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, and you can see even an English translation of his last Knesset speech, where he's very clear about his opposition to a two-state solution.
All right, again, this is the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports and News Radio. We're being joined by Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen, and he is talking about the assassination that occurred 20 years ago. Let's talk a bit about the assassination itself. A lot of people blame the Shin Bet for lack of security. You see in the Kempler video that Yigal Amir walks pretty easily to the prime minister. How much blame does the security, or how much blame should the security receive?
Well, I think it's strange. I haven't seen the video for a long time. I remember seeing the video probably about 15 years ago. But what struck me as strange is the fact that Yigal Amir is still alive. You would think that anybody trained to protect the Prime Minister of Israel would instinctively shoot dead anybody who fires, whether real bullets or blank bullets, anybody who takes a shot at the Prime Minister of Israel really shouldn't be standing. And the fact that Yigal Amir is alive and serving his time indicates that there was some, at the very least, negligence on behalf of the security details surrounding Rabin.
So let's go even more than that, because you're saying at the very least there is a poll done by I-24 that says 35% of Israelis don't even think Amir pulled the trigger. And there are obviously conspiracy theories galore, things inside job, questions of being shot in the back, bleeding from the front, the why that Yigal Amir at one point sounded like he shot blanks, different theories out there. Tell us if the conspiracy theories hold any water.
Well, the truth is, I don't know. I was 15 years old at the time. I can't claim to be an expert on what actually took place, but I think there's a lot of room. There's a lot of justification for reinvestigating the assassination. I mean, a good question might be how much it matters anymore. We're 20 years ahead, and things are what they are. Some people might think that if we were to investigate the Rabin assassination and discover some huge dramatic cover-up, it would dramatically change the attitudes of Israelis today. But I think a lot of people, at least just as many people, assume that there's already such a distrust in Israeli society towards political leadership, towards the media, that I'm not sure that many Israelis would even be shocked at this point, at least not the younger generation. I think there was a generation, the generation that was more relevant at the time of the assassination, which might shift their position if it turned out that the story isn't what they think it was. But the truth is, this younger generation is so cynical and jaded towards politicians and towards the establishment in general. I'm not sure how much of a difference it would make at this point.
But that would be something that would make everyone, would it make them scared or make them angry that if there was a massive cover-up? One of the theories out there is that Shimon Peres was behind it. So if, let's say, it was someone that high up and they killed Rabin, wouldn't people be more frightened of what the government could do, or would they be angry at the government?
Well, again, I think that Shimon Peres today is a very old man. I don't know how relevant it is to people. I think most people today suspect that governments do these things. Not just our government. I think governments all over the world behave in such a way. I think it would surprise fewer people than it would have had it been uncovered 20 years ago. I think at this point, most people have a distrust, and perhaps a healthy distrust of government in Israel as well. But for it to, if it was indeed like a conspiracy, if there really was a plot, an inside plot to kill Rabin, and it was in fact somebody other than Yigal Amir who killed him for reasons other than what we're told, then chances are it would have been orchestrated by somebody high up. I mean, we're talking about the assassination of an Israeli prime minister. I don't think that's something that could be organized by a group of people, just Knesset members or military officials. I think it needs to be somebody significantly high up.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports and News Radio, talking to Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen about the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, 20-year anniversary. It's interesting, Rabbi, that there are similarities between the Kennedy assassination and the Rabin assassination. Both murders were filmed, one by, of course, the famous Zapruder film, the other by the Kepler video. Both assassins had this look that they were happy they did it, but both claimed to be some type of patsy in some way. Oswald said it straight out. Amir hinted towards it. Talk about the similarities between the Kennedy assassination and the Rabin assassination.
Well, the truth is I'm not an expert. I'm the wrong person to ask. Is there somewhere online where listeners can see the Kepler video?
Yes, that's on YouTube. Anyone can go to YouTube, type in Kepler video, and it shows the video of Amir walking in. The video is not in the best shape as the Zapruder film is, but people can check out that video. Let's move on and bring up a topic that I also found intriguing, that Rabin, as I mentioned, was elected 2 different times, non-consecutively. That's happened 5 times in Israel's history. Bibi's one of the 5. In comparison, in the United States, that's happened 1 time. Does that go to what you're talking about, people not trusting the government, maybe a lack of government options, that we keep electing the same people to office over and over?
Well, I think that Yitzhak Rabin was of a generation that the public, for the most part, trusted to lead the people. I mean, that founding generation, people like Yitzhak Rabin, Golda Meir, Menachem Begin, it was a generation that the public had a lot more natural trust for. And it was a simpler time, and the public could afford to be more naive. I think today things are a lot more complex. Leaders are more overtly corrupt. There's a lot of cynicism in our political culture today. I think there's a lot less trust from the public. And I think, like you said, there are not a lot of serious options. We kind of look at our politicians and we see that we have to make do with we hold our nose and we vote.
So it's interesting to bring that up, because the question I get, or an answer I get, if I talk to the average Israeli and say, what do you think of Benjamin Netanyahu? Most don't necessarily like him, but then I say, who would you like instead? And most people can't give me an answer. Why is that? Shouldn't there be someone else out there that the people like as their prime minister?
It could simply be that the type of person that we'd like to have as a leader isn't able to survive or thrive in the current political culture. Meaning, I think to really get ahead in the current political culture, a person has to compromise on certain principles. Too much idealism is a hindrance in Israel's political reality today. So I think that the type of people many of us would like to see, whether it be Menachem Begin or Yitzhak Shamir or Golda Meir, somebody with more idealism or altruism, somebody who really sees themselves as responsible for the Jewish people, for shepherding, their flocks in this chapter of Jewish history. These people are very rare. These people don't really get so high in our political system today. The people who seem to thrive and get ahead in our political system are the people who really are like, for lack of a better term, like Western-style politicians.
So what, therefore, is the answer? We have this corrupt system, and they're the people leading us. Then what can we do about it as the average citizen living in Israel?
It's a great question. I think that awareness is important. I think the fact that the public is less trusting of the system today than we were 20 years ago is a good sign. Right now it expresses itself through a lot of cynicism, and detachment, but hopefully if people take it upon themselves to really be educated, to understand the issues in more than just a superficial manner. I know there's a lot of alternative media now, social media, that gives people access to perspectives that they weren't getting before, when there was basically a monopoly of the ruling class on information. I think that, I'm optimistic because I look at the demographic trends in the country, and I see that, I think the establishment also sees that those who've been leading the country and controlling the country since 1948 are no longer able to hold on to the levers of power. They really didn't have enough children. They didn't have enough grandchildren. And a very different Israel is rising right now. So I think if we're able to hold on and survive another 10, 20 years, we'll be living in a very different country with very different political options.
So you see in Israel 10 or 20 years from now that is closer to utopian as opposed to what it is now, where there are complaints.
I don't know about utopian, but I think, until now we've had a very westernized ruling class that's controlled the country, controlled information, controlled the army until very recently, and still controls the courts. And we see it slowly shifting. Already the majority of combat officers are coming from a very different sector with very different ideologies, very different identities. Those who initially declared the state and ruled the state really had this notion, had this vision of Israel being a villa in a jungle, being this kind of Western crusader fortress in the Middle East, part of this island of Western civilization, amongst, what they consider to be these primitive, Arab barbarians. And I think the Israel that's slowly kind of coming into focus is an Israel that fits in a lot better with the rest of the Middle East. And I think an Israel that actually fits in with our neighbors is the type of Israel that's going to be capable of making peace. At the end of the day, a lot of the criticism we get from the Palestinians and their supporters is that Israel essentially appears to be a settler colonialist state, that we look like this kind of artificial European colonialist project in the Middle East, and we want to be detached, meaning we communicate, whether it's through Hasbara, whether it's through diplomacy, whether it's just in our media to ourselves, in outlets like Haaretz or Channel 2, that we want to be part of the West, we don't want to be part of the Middle East. But that sector of Israeli society that's been saying that until now is losing more and more power each day. And the sectors of Israeli society that are filling the void are those that could more easily fit into the region and lead an Israel that will actually be an organic part of the Middle East at peace with our neighbors.
All right, well said. Again, this has been another episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. The rabbi spoke about alternative media. That's what this is. That's part of the reason why I broke off from Arutz Sheva. Alternative media, go away for the mainstream. You want to support this program, do so through PayPal, IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com. Again, IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com is the PayPal. Rabbi, would you like to give a plug for anything that you would like to give a plug for before we go?
Well, really, it's just education. You can check out some of our work at alternativeaction.org, or find me on Facebook, Yehuda HaKohen, HaKohen. But the real issues, we have to figure out. Zionism has been a successful revolutionary movement until now, but we have to figure out what the next steps are. We have to figure out what the next goals of our People's Liberation Movement is. And once we figure out what those goals are, we'll be able to be the characters working towards those goals and to advance Jewish history to the next stage.
All right, that sounds good. Rabbi, thank you for being on the program. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and shalom from Israel.